Welcome! Now it's time for part 4 of the computational action process. Today we'll talk about the tips and tools from the engineering industry that can help you as a team manage your project and implement and work on a team. I'm Nicole Pei. I'm a computer scientist at MIT, and I'm the creator of the computational action process. As a reminder, computational action process is licensed under the Creative Commons license and can be used or shared only for non-commercial purposes. Okay, so let's jump into part 4. You've learned almost the entire process so far. You've explored first problems in your community and learned how to define specific issues that exist that you also want to work on. Then you wrote user research questions, you analyzed existing solutions in your community, and you created user personas based on the summary and the synthesis of that user and community research. And then we worked on the design section, which is a really big section. First, you designed your impact matrix, during which you considered positive and negative impacts, and then you learned how you can prototype and test front-end designs that are authentic to the practice of the engineering field. Today, we'll continue discussing practices that are authentic to engineers and scientists, because they themselves use these practices to make their projects come to life. Okay, so how to organize a technical project with a team. Task management is something you probably already have done without even knowing it. If you've ever made a to-do list, you've done task management. Why are we taking a day to talk about managing timelines? Well, in a project, oftentimes you might be working with many people. It might be a multi-week or multi-month project that you might be working on. And what may seem simple at first can get confusing quite quickly to track who's doing what task is at what stage. In an industry, engineering projects follow a common path from planning, research, design, implementation, and launch, which, as you may notice, is pretty similar to our computational action process. So it's the same steps that we've been doing in this computational action process that industry engineers, designers, project managers, product managers all use. So we'll talk about all these tools and tips today to help you in your project catch a timeline or work with a team. Okay, so I like using this visual as an illustration of what goes on during a project process because I saw a lot of this firsthand too when I was a product manager. And above the surface is usually more the visible parts of the progress that you might make on an app. So it could be UI designs, it could be feature proposals, it could be code too, or prototypes. It could be the impact matrices that you made or the user personas that you already made in the process. So that's quite visible above the surface, right? But under the surface, there is a lot going on. There's a lot going on to get a project ready. And as you may already know, there is organization that you have to put into place when you're working on a team. You might have to document what you're doing so you understand what other people are doing, also so that you, a few weeks looking back at your project, know what you were doing. And regular communication between team members, including frequent status checks, is oftentimes going on below the surface in order to make sure that above the surface things are continuing to progress. Right, so all of this under the surface management can get messy quickly. But luckily, there are some tools that you can utilize even for your student projects that can help this process. And I'll teach you what those tools are today. We'll dive straight into that. First, I'm going to talk about planning high level. So it's always great to start with a high level plan. You can start with something what we call a Gantt chart, and you may have heard about a Gantt chart before. So if you have a school project deadline or a hackathon deadline or any other deadline that you want to finish your project by, you can work backwards to fill out how long each task or each section will take. This is one example on the screen here is showing in a very high level how long planning, which should take, how long research should take, how long design should take, implementation, which means making your project, and then follow-up or future, the final part of your project. There's another way of making a Gantt chart, which is a bit more detailed. So in this screen here, you can see that each task is listed out, or you can fill in the tasks for your project, and then you can fill in how many days or how many weeks that might take. This template is also included in the Computational Action Toolkit, so be sure to check it out. This might be very helpful for you as you organize your project with your team. Okay, so I also want to introduce to you something called Agile methodology. If you've worked with engineers or folks in the past, you may have heard this term already. If you haven't, don't worry at all. We'll talk all about what it means. And in fact, you've probably already been doing something similar to Agile methodology in the past. The key takeaway of Agile methodology is that it is an iterative process that will help you in your project development. So oftentimes people use what is called Scrum, and Scrum is this process, which includes listing out your tasks in a backlog. It includes updating the statuses. It includes oftentimes discussing with a team. In industry, you might do this once a week, but depending on your school project or the project that you're undertaking, you might find it easy to update either more frequently or less frequently, depending on your team. Okay, so helpful tools you can use in order to adopt Agile methodology. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to do everything from scratch. There's a ton of helpful tools that I'll now introduce you to so that you can consider adopting that into your project management process. Okay, so these are some of the tools that I really like to talk about, and I'll give you a few options for each section. So you can feel free to play around with it and see what really seems easy to use to you and what really jumps out to you. So number one, managing tasks among your team. And this is helpful even if you're working on an individual project, but maybe your project might have many tasks and you need to manage it even just for yourself. So Trello is a tool that is used in industry by engineers and engineering teams. It's pretty easy to use. It comes with pre-populated templates that you can then fill out. So you can try what is called a project management board that you can find on Trello. We'll get into an example of that later on in today's lesson. Some other tools that go under managing tasks among your team include Notion. You may have heard of Notion. It's kind of like Trello and Google Docs and calendars all mixed into one. And even GitHub. You may also have heard of GitHub if you've already been programming. GitHub is a place where you can put your code online, but it also offers tools for managing that code together. So you don't necessarily need to use Trello. I'll go into an example using Trello, but feel free to play around and see what really works for your project or your project team. Okay, number two is implementation. I already mentioned GitHub. GitHub is a very popular tool that that many engineers use in order to host their code online. You won't code necessarily in GitHub, but if you've used GitHub, you can already know that you can easily comment on other people's code. So if you're working on a team, this can be very useful. And you can fork or branch off of other projects that are hosted on GitHub. So you can take existing projects that other people have used and take inspiration from that. So it's a very useful tool. Engineers definitely extensively use it. So it's a very helpful tool if you're thinking about continuing your engineering career. I definitely recommend checking it out. Number three, documentation. So documentation is really important for keeping track of what you're doing and continuing to record that either for your team members or for your future self or for other people that you want to share your project with. I just recommend writing down in whatever typical docs you might use. This could include Google Docs and Google Drive, of course, easy to use and free to use. They're good for organization, documentation, but whatever you currently use for documenting should work really well. You can feel free to play around with that. Finally, this is sometimes missed in other parts when we talk about project management, but team communication is also a really big part. Right? So even emailing or texting or figuring out when you want to meet, when you can meet together as a team can become a scheduling headache. So if you are working together with a team and trying to figure out how to better schedule your calendar, you can try a tool that's called When to Meet. That's pretty useful, pretty easy to use. Of course, you can continue emailing or texting or whatever works well for your project. But remember to be constantly communicating because that's a really big part of project management. Okay, so let's jump in and look at this example of task management using Trello. There are, like I've already mentioned, other tools that are very similar that absolutely feel free to use, feel free to play around and see what is most intuitive for you. I like Trello because it is pretty easy to use and they give you templates that you can easily jump in and start with. Some key words here for project management. I already mentioned backlog. So a backlog is all of your to-do tasks. So you can think of this as just your big, long to-do list, but in a slightly more organized way so then you can understand the status of each task as it moves out of the to-do list or the backlog into implementation or other statuses. It's good to make a task. Every task that needs to get doing should be put in the backlog. Of course, you can feel free to see what really makes sense, what task you need to make an item in the backlog for, and what task is maybe not necessary for that. And that kind of depends on your project and your team too. In the doing category, these are the current tasks that are being currently done, currently either under research if it's a research task or implementation if it's a coding task. Block is a very helpful category. I really like to talk about blocked because this is a way that you can communicate with your team members when something can't move forward. So if everyone on the team should keep an eye on the block tasks because this is a way that you can communicate, I'm working on something that now I'm blocked on and we should talk about this. Instead of needing to email or text or otherwise, text communicate with each other every time something is blocked, you can put the block task in the block category and everyone checking the project management board will be able to see that immediately. Code review is the final section that I'll just briefly touch on. So in industry, code review is very standard because you want other engineers to review your code before it's approved and before it's committed to production. Depending on your project, you may find it really helpful to get team members to review your code if you are coding. As always, you can ask mentors, coaches, other people to review your code, whether you're coding it in a certain editor or using App Inventor or some other tool to write your code. Okay, so like I mentioned, Trello already gives you some really nice project management boards that you can take advantage of and change it around to suit the needs of your project. This is just one look at one of their project management boards. You can see there's a backlog category, there's a blocked category that I've added because I really feel like that's very important. And I would suggest taking a look at the project management board. You can also do the Kanban board. It's very similar. You see which category, which board makes more sense for your team or your project. Like I already mentioned, please try to make sure you have a blocked, a pending, or a questions category. These are really important to facilitate that easier communication with you and your team. I definitely recommend having these categories so that any questions that come up, you can drop it in those categories and your teams checking the board can easily see what's going on and what needs to be worked on. There's some more detailed instructions for the Trello board that you can see in the student guide for section 4 of the computational action process, which is online on the computational action website. And these are some detailed instructions for how to make a task. So once you start working around in Trello or a similar tool, you'll find that it becomes really clear how you can make a task. So you add something like a title, for instance, you add a description, you can add members who is either assigned to the task or you want to keep track of or want to be notified when the task status changes. You can add a due date. You can also check watch so that you yourself can watch the status of the task. And of course, to move a task, you just easily drag and drop the task around to the right column that it fits under. It's pretty intuitive once you play around with the tool, but of course, there's a lot of also online resources that exist that help you out with tools like Trello or other project management tools, whichever tool you choose. So the key takeaway, though, is that for managing your project, you can use tools that help you organize. So tools like Trello, tools like GitHub or Notion, that might be really helpful for you to organize as you create your project. Now let's take a look at another student example. This student project is also from MIT Future Makers Program 2021. This student group created a project called AI Spy, which we'll get into and take a look at how they did the implementation. Okay, so this student team, the problem that they wanted to try to solve is better object detection using artificial intelligence for visually impaired peoples. So they listed out their problem, right? In 2018, over 30 million adults in the US reported experiencing vision loss. For people with visual impairment, objects are identified through touch, but what if the object can't be located? So they tried to create a solution that can help folks with visual impairment locate objects better. They had some great quotes through user research. For people without disabilities, technology makes things easier, right? So they're really creating an impact with technology for this problem. They also did some user research and market research. Again, these student examples, as well as the other ones that we've talked about, are all available for more detail viewing on the Computational Action website. So you can be sure to read more through that on the website. So I'll get into their implementation. So they created this app called AI Spy. AI Spy is an app that helps people with significant visual impairment detect objects in their camera's frame of vision and navigates the people to the object. So this is the solution that they created. And they also added a technical implementation slide. So here, they point out that their key features are to improve accessibility while maintaining privacy. So they added voice recognition, they added haptic feedback into their app, and they also added audio notifications in order to best meet the user needs. And they listed out their technical components and their technical architecture here. So this is a key part of the implementation of their project, which includes not just coding, but listing out the architecture of what they're building and then coding for that architecture. So here's their demo.
The app provides a video feed for the sighted. The all essential alerts and elements of the UI are made accessible to all users. In this example, our model is detecting the chairs, dining table, laptop, and bottle present on the screen. To search for an object, I need to press and hold the microphone button at the bottom of the screen and start speaking. I can then pan across the scene, allowing the model to analyze the video feed. Once the algorithm has detected the object, the user is notified and will be guided towards it. Find my laptop.
Finding your laptop. Laptop found. Turn slightly right. Turn slightly left. Turn slightly right. Turn slightly right. Go forward. Go forward.
Okay, so just to wrap up for this section, putting it all together, you're going to plan with your team, or if you're working individually, with organization tools like you can use GitHub, you can use Trello, you can use Docs or Notion, as mentioned before. You can find all of these tools in the toolkit, which is, again, available online. In the toolkit, I also added some extra items that you can fill out, including team tasks and also team roles if you want to be more explicit in separating out roles and figuring out who is doing what. And then you can implement with your team. Implementation usually means coding. There's definitely some documentation or writing what you're implementing as part of the implementation process. And then you want to keep track of the progress, right? So we talked about the Gantt chart, using tools like Trello to keep track of the status of your tasks. And you want to be sure to communicate frequently with members of your team so you're all on the same page as you implement your project towards a project deadline. So as I mentioned, all of the teamwork worksheets is available in the Computational Action Toolkit. This wraps up the teamwork, project management, and implementation section of Computational Action, but this is only an introduction to this topic. So be sure to keep going, figure out what tools are most useful to you, and I'll meet you back here for part 5, the last part of Computational Action.